I want to thank everyone. Thank everybody for attending the December 7th meeting of the Seattle Design Commission. We have a number of items on the agenda today. We're starting at 10:30 until noon with the commission's first look at a bridge to replace the existing bridge at Carkey Park, and we'll have the design team introduce themselves in a moment. We'll have a business section that's from 10:30 until noon. We'll break from noon until 1, and then from 1 until 1:30 we'll start with another business section. And at 1:30 today we'll get a briefing from Thatcher Imboden of Sound Transit to talk about Sound Transit's TOD programs and how it's potentially shaping or influencing the West Seattle to Ballard Library Extension investments. Why don't we go ahead and start with a round of introductions, first with commissioners. And commissioners, as part of the introduction, could you make sure that you introduce yourself and your role on the commission? Why don't we start with, there are a number of commissioners that are attending online today. Why don't we start with Molly, then Pooja, then Phoebe.
Good morning, I'm Molly Spatalnik. I'm the Urban Design Commissioner.
Hi there, I'm Pooja Shah. I'm the Engineer Commissioner.
I'm Phoebe Bogart, Landscape Architect Commissioner.
And then
Jay.
Oh, sorry, Jay. Excuse me.
We didn't hear you.
We didn't hear you.
I'm Jay Backer. I'm the Get Engaged Commissioner.
Thank you, Jay.
Elizabeth Connor, Artist Commissioner. Morning.
Hi, Matt Elfs, Architect Commissioner.
Jill Crary, At-Large Commissioner and Chair.
I'm Kevin O'Neill. I'm the Transportation Planning Commissioner, and I'll also be facilitating the discussion about the action today.
Ben Gist, Architect Commissioner.
We have a number of people from the development team. So, Scott, do you want to lead?
Yeah, I'll lead us off.
Okay.
Colin, you want to start?
Yeah, hi, I'm Colin Campbell. I'm a Planning Development Specialist with Parks and Recreation.
Yep, go ahead.
Jessica Miller, Project Manager and Architect with Element Architects.
Evan McMillan, Element Architects. Then Scott Crawford, I'm a partner at Element Architects.
And I think online we've been joined by Deshawn and Owen.
Yep.
Deshawn and Owen, if you could introduce yourself and your role with the project.
Deshawn, you want to go first? DB, you're muted if you're talking. There you go.
Can you hear us okay, Deshawn?
We're not hearing you.
We're not hearing you. Oh, okay. I think he'll come back. Owen, would you introduce yourself, please? Owen, you're muted.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I think it was muted on that side because I was talking through the whole time until it told me I was unmuted. So I think that happened to Deshawn. But hello everyone. My name is Owen Oliver. I come from the people of the Lower Columbia River, the Salish Sea, and the Southwest Pueblos of Isleta. I'm here with Headwater people and doing tribal engagement and indigenous design on this project.
Thank you, Owen. I think that everyone's here. If there aren't any questions or comments, maybe Scott or Colin, are you going to kick us off this morning?
I'll lead us off, and hopefully when we get to DB's section, we'll be able to get his audio in. If not, I will try my best to make my way through it.
And one last thing, sorry, before you start, we have you until noon.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right. We're excited to be here today at as Michael mentioned before, we are looking at a replacement of the existing Carkeek Park pedestrian bridge. We're going to walk you through today. General introduction to the team. You've met a few of the members, but we have some other folks that aren't here today. We'll cover the 2020 feasibility study that led to where we are now. Looking at what the schedule is for this project moving forward. The work that we've been doing with Hummingbird on the community engagement side. Also the work that we've been doing with Owen on tribal engagement and outreach. Some of the overall site analysis that then is informing also the BNSF requirements that we have, given that this is going over the BNSF tracks. We'll get into some of the alignments that we're looking at. That is the limit of kind of where we've taken things so far, is just the overall alignment of this on the site. And then finish up just talking about some of the materials and other thoughts that we have for moving forward into the next stages of design. So LMN is the prime on this. It's somewhat unusual for the architects to be leading a bridge project, but this was something that we worked on with Parks, given the significance of this bridge within Carkeek Park and looking for this enjoyable experience. The prime engineer that we're working with is RHC Engineering. We worked with them on the feasibility study. We also have Clayton Binkley, who is a design engineer on this. He brings additional, not only engineering thinking on it, but he is himself a fabricator with a background in metal fabrication. So we're trying to leverage his approach to how we can take and think creatively about the overall structure on the site. Karen Keast will be our landscape architect. Owen from Headwater People is heading up the tribal engagement. And then down at the bottom, we have the collection of folks led by Karima Edwards from Hummingbird, working with us on the community engagement piece. So we are down here at the bottom in Seattle. For those of you not aware, Carkeek Park is up to the north, closer to the shoreline area, and around 110th Avenue. When we started the feasibility study back in 2020, it was a two-part study. We were taking and looking at the conditions of the existing bridge on the site. We were also looking at what alternative replacements might end up looking like. So one of the things that we were finding in the initial assessment of the bridge was seeing what is its life ahead of itself at that point. It's difficult to put an exact number on something like that, but what we came away understanding from a number of observations was it is reaching the end of its useful life. And there's not actually an ability to take and rehabilitate that structure, given that its foundations, its supports, its height even, all conflict with the requirements put forward by BNSF. So any work we would try to do to that would require lifting it up, moving its foundations out. At that point, we're building a new bridge. So that was what was decided. I think some things interesting to note with this, there's actually a spot on the bridge that was struck by a train at one point. We actually met someone at one of our community engagement meetings that saw it happen. So they that have led to its demise over time, such as the concrete deck being right on top of the wide flange, leaving no ability to actually maintain that. And this is something that we think is going to be important throughout the effort that we're going through on this project, given that maintenance over the tracks within the BNSF right-of-way is a challenging situation to have to deal with. So we're going to be thinking about how do we make strategic decisions to limit the amount of maintenance that will need to happen regularly for this bridge, because if you're burdened with that BNSF coordination, it's likely to just occur less often. And then there were some additional assessments of what was happening on various structural members, and you could see things like this, given that we're in a marine environment, corrosion is happening constantly to these materials. So that's something that we want to be sensitive to with whatever we're pushing forward as the overall design. So when we were then looking at the the replacement bridge, we did an initial study to understand different span types that we could end up using within this location. We're needing to pay attention to the BNSF requirements, particularly the vertical offset from the tracks, as well as the horizontal offsets from the center line. But we also need to think about what our foundations are doing. We have two very different conditions. On the parking lot side, we have soils that we can easily bear on with ample room around them, and in particular, easy access to that. On the beach side, everything gets harder. We have liquefiable soils. We're basically landing in sand that is in proximity to the water table. We don't have any ability to actually drive machinery out onto those tracks. So getting access to that is going to be a challenge, likely avoiding anything of like barging things in, because then all of a sudden we're into needing shoreline permits. What we ended the study with was looking at two different span types at that time. And we weren't trying to fully design these, but the two different span types have different benefits to them. As well as compromises. The truss allows us to make a very economical system with easy integration of the throw barrier that we need. So that was one of the options that we were looking at. The challenge that it imposes on us is that the parking lot foundation and the beach foundation are equally loaded. So that makes a challenge for what we do on that beach side. The other alternative that we looked at was a cable stay. Cable stays typically as span types are more expensive than you're going to see a truss. But when we then consider the cost of the foundations and the challenge of getting to those beach foundations, we're left with an opportunity to concentrate a lot of the foundations over on the parking lot side. Essentially, we're cantilevering the bridge out over and onto the beach side, and we're just picking up the live load of people walking on it and exciting it. So much lower foundation requirements there. We did an initial cost study at that time. We were seeing that these two were in parity to each other. All things were the same except for the span type. While we were doing that study, we were also looking at some general conditions along the length of the bridge. Starting over here on the left, this is what the existing bridge is like. It's maybe 5 feet to the outside, which at the time we were working on this was during the height of the pandemic. And so the idea of people using public space and being able to have space around them was top of our minds, and realizing we probably need more than 5 feet. The other reality with this is the current span is, I think, like maybe a little bit more than 40 feet, but those foundations are in a location in the BNSF right-of-way that we could not replicate. So the span that we're looking at is more on the order of about 100 feet long. Just by necessity of that right-of-way condition. Once we get to that length, a 5 foot wide path is not going to be stiff enough to deal with the lateral forces. So it offers us an opportunity for making actually a much more generous walking area on the bridge. So we're looking at something in the order of 10 to 12 feet wide. This will be influenced by what we choose as a deck material, which will then have an impact on the overall weight of the bridge. And that will then drive what the span has to achieve. So we'll be negotiating somewhere in there. I think sometimes it can be seen as bigger could potentially be better, but in this case, it's going to penalize us from a weight point of view. And at a certain point, there's not that much more we get as a benefit from that additional width. The other thing that we were considering at the time of the feasibility study was the throw barrier system that is required by BNSF, and that is in relation to their right-of-way. So in the diagram below, you see in the blue, that's the guardrail that we're going to need everywhere, and then the extents of some kind of throw barrier system. This is a very generic design at that point. But there's two different options for how we can take and fulfill the requirements of BNSF. We can either take and do a 10-foot tall straight throw barrier, or we could do an 8-foot tall to the maximum height, but it has to curve inwards a certain distance. The reality is when you take and you unfold this one, it's 10 feet long. So our recommendation at that time, something that we've done on past bridges going over BNSF, is to go with the 10-foot tall. It just makes for a more enjoyable environment when you don't have something that's kind of pinning you in. And so that is what we're moving forward with. And as we go, we'll see what it means for, yes, you could also be.
Sorry,
Nope. Yeah,
Sorry.
it doesn't have to be perfectly straight, but it does have to be 10 feet tall. So if we were to splay it out, it's a little longer, but that can also lead to a more comfortable user experience on the bridge itself. So that then led us to the The actual project competition was put out. We were selected as part of that. And then since then, we've started working. And I would say we've completed this 4 set of initial bubbles. And what we've been doing with this entire schedule is looking at how we go through the review process with various agencies and making sure we're doing that in a sequence that doesn't set us up to be in front of the public and mention things that later we have to reverse track on. So we have had an initial public engagement meeting out at Carkeek Park. We spent a day out there. DB will speak to that, hopefully. We were getting people's impressions of the park, of the bridge itself, the experience out there. We've put all of the material you'll see today in front of the Parks Department to get their feedback on the various alignments that we were beginning to look at. And we have some conclusions that we'll share from that meeting today. And now we're here in front of you all with the idea that the next step for us is to put together a package of drawings that we then send off to BNSF to get their blessing, because they're the ones that are going to take the longest to review all of this. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to DB to talk about the community engagement piece. And DB, if you're there, and you could just say you're there, and then whenever you're ready, just tell me to change slides. You could just say next.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for that, Scott. And I'll just introduce a few more people, like he said, that kind of really worked with us, who are not here, but I would really love to acknowledge them. Starting with Karima Edwards, who's the owner and principal of Herman Bird, Laza Robinson, who's a project manager, and then Judah Cooper Payne, who really helped us from a creative standpoint as a creative consultant. And so we can go to that very first slide, just the overall community engagement process. So when we come in and do community engagement, one of the first things that we like to do, one of the foundational pieces, is really conducting a racial equity analysis. So the racial equity analysis analyzes, summarizes, and acknowledges some of the policies, practices, and then the historical policies that have really excluded BIPOC and marginalized communities. And that for this project, you know, of course, the area surrounding Carkeek Park, and then, of course, really looking at some of these present challenges and current demographic information for nearby residents who are most likely to access the park. And so this is really key for us, because this information really helps us and informs us on really creating an equitable approach when it comes to community engagement. And so really making sure that those community members and the support methods that which we use for community engagement is really led by that racial equity analysis. And so we did that racial equity analysis, again, that really led us to really identify some of these target demographics and help lead the approach in terms of how we really wanted to engage for this project. And so part of that engagement, which we'll get further to in this presentation, was really conducting a community engagement survey, right? The community engagement event that Scott talked about, that we'll also talk about in this project, in this meeting at Carkeek Park. And then all of that really analyzing the data and really giving that to really inform the design. And so, of course, really making this process iterative and continuing to repeat this process as we get more information, as we, you know, get more context and more engagement. How do we take that and continue to iterate this engagement process to make sure that it's the most beneficial, so that we're making sure that the people who are typically left out of the engagement process are there. So if you go to the next slide, some of this information is the first part of this information comes from the racial equity analysis. And again, part of that was really understanding from a racial demographic standpoint what the area is surrounding Carkeek, and then comparing that to a similar area for minorities. I mean, really looking at the demographics there, again, from a racial standpoint, from an economic standpoint, and from a diversity standpoint, and that's with disabilities, that is with income, that is with language, et cetera, et cetera. And so some of the things that we really got from it, if you go to the next slide, when we really examining a cause and really thinking about how can we eliminate barriers to access. So there was 4 main things that really came up, and that was foster, right? Really fostering a more inclusive culture and acknowledging historical harm that has been committed and conducted. And so really committing to that, committing to anti-racism and equitable practices. centering and really centering BIPOC and historically marginalized communities, really from a providing standpoint, really making sure that we provide culturally responsive communication and information to communities, and really making sure that that's accessible. And then from a support standpoint, really supporting a shared understanding from a holistic standpoint, that this process that we are continuously learning and unlearning, as well as we get more information, as we continue to engage more, how can we continue to support each other? How can we continue to build a shared understanding? How can we continuously learn and unlearn? And so if you go to this next slide, in terms of clarifying the purposes and what really matters most, again, and part of this is really acknowledging the history of Indigenous displacement, right, and really understanding what that is. And I know Owen will talk about that a little bit further down in the slide, so I won't get too much into that. And then, including diverse communities holistically as part of a greater conversation, right? How can we continue to engage more? How can we continue to include the community holistically? And then the main part is capturing how people feel, what people want, and what they want to experience using this pedestrian bridge. And how can we incorporate some of these historically displaced people and cultures and systems and ideas and beliefs into the design, or to make it more inclusive, to make it more welcoming, and things like that. And so if you go to this last slide, I'm really considering the adverse impacts, right? And so this is things that we found, things that we heard, really tokenism, right? How can we ensure that tokenism doesn't happen? And that is really cultural reflection not done in a way that is meaningful, right? Representation, and really making sure that from a representation, we send the right message about who belongs, and what must be done in a way that's inclusive, respectful, and that makes people feel belong, that creates this sense of belonging, and really understanding that construction impacts and can disrupt park visitors, park programming, and surrounding neighborhoods. So how can we make sure that these adverse impacts don't happen in a project? And so how can we ensure that we get representation and acknowledgement and engagement from people to make sure that some of these things don't happen? And so, again, that was more from a racial equity standpoint and an analysis standpoint. And then I'll talk a little bit more about how that really led us to, again, create the survey, and then also, too, from the community engagement event. And so if you go to this next slide, this picture is of the community engagement event. So we, like Scott said, spent the day out in the park at Carkeek, really engaging with people, really getting thoughts, inputs. And so it was at the beginning of the fall, the first day of fall, so we thought it would be cool to really get some stories and how can we incorporate the fall theme. And so we created, these story leaps, and really asked people to kind of share their stories and experience at the bridge, right, at the park, and what it means to them. And so we got a lot of feedback there. And then we also did some cider pressing and things like that, so that kind of gave it an extra boost. And even though the weather was back and forth, still had a great turnout overall, and really got some key insight into what people want, how people want to feel, memories that people have from the park. And I can recall a story of some women there who talked about their experience. They had lived in the neighborhood for 80 years and talked about how they used to have to slide down the side to get to the beach before the bridge was even there, kind of what they wanted to, how they wanted to feel with the replacement, and kind of what it just meant for them holistically. And so, again, we got different stories from a diverse group of people, from a diverse group of perspectives, holistically. And so if you go to this next slide, we'll talk about some of just the outputs from that, and then as well as the survey in itself. And so from the survey respondents that we got, most people were over 18, right? And most people dropped to the park. 94% of the people actually used the bridge to get to the beach, as well as other things. And so most of the people that we talked to at the event, and a lot of people who took the survey, really visit the park frequently. So 49% of the survey respondents visited the park 6 or more times in the last 12 months. And so really just the usage there really talked about the connection. And a lot of people talked about how Carkeek is their favorite park and how they just spend time on the bridge, just looking, how they like to see the train drive by, how they like to go to the beach and things like that. And so really getting more information there. We collected information on activities really done at the beach as well. And then again, from those personal stories, how can we really take that information? And so from just a understanding standpoint, there were three main kind of focus points that really came up from the personal stories. And that was the access issues, right? And people having the ability to really access the beach. So of course, people with diverse abilities and things like that really being able to access and go to the side. Of course, from the stairs and things, the view. People really love the view. People really love to be on the bridge, to just see and watch and experience. And then just the love for the park. Again, people love how it's connected to so many different communities, the forest aspect of it, the trees, and the ability for a lot of people who said, this is our backyard, right? The park is our backyard. We really love to experience it. And so really just spending time, even on the bridge, just sitting there, again, watching and experiencing, and it's part of the community for people. And even people, talked about, hey, can we close up the stairs, even though it says no dogs and animals are allowed on the beach, but we would still love to take our dogs there, right? And so just this whole idea that the park is for the whole family and the bridge is for the whole family, including the dogs and things like that. And so really great engagement, really great feedback holistically. And so I'm going to turn it over to Owen, who will talk a little bit more about the tribal engagement pieces.
Thank you, DB. Owen, you're up. Looks like you're still muted. There it is.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Deshaun. So with the tribal engagement and design, really honing in on those stories and those personal stories and the stories of the land, knowing that is intertwined. Here, we're going to kind of be talking about, my personal expertise around the lands, but also conversations with language keepers and what tribal folks want to see with this, bridge. So next slide. So there had been a lot of translations around Quiautub, and that was kind of the first step of thinking, okay, let's understand what this hints at, knowing that we can't get a direct translation because that's Lashutsi. And I was saying around drop down place, leave it alone, and where people were sent. And I had known that this wasn't, a funeral spot, or this wasn't a place where we bury our people, because it's, close to the water and just didn't make sense. But as I talked to, people for the playground, I was helping out with a little bit of outreach at the playground of Carkeek, and people wanted to know if this was, ominous, leave it alone, and where people are sent. But I talked to Nancy Bob and Tammy Hone, who helped redo the Waterlines map and revitalize Lashutsi. And we came together and thought about some hypothesis of what this name Quiautub could mean. We're hypothesizing that it could reference the place where people are sent to gather fresh water and to leave Piper's Creek alone to ensure fresh water. So this idea of, thinking of Piper's Creek as a valuable relationship as it gathers and gives fresh water and the salmon there, and the viewpoint of Carkeek Park, looking out to the Salish Sea, to the Kitsap Peninsula. It's a super important spot. And we could think about before contact, how this place was a place where people were sent to gather fresh water. So this was really helpful to start thinking about how we could bring Indigenous voices and design to this bridge. Next slide, please. So one thing while talking with Indigenous people, Coast Salish people about this project is that signage wasn't, good enough. That if they wanted to see Indigenous engagement throughout this bridge, it had to come through some design motifs or how we think about, designing bridges or showcasing that, because it is a transition from this forested park to the water. There's, that direct relationship of, that transition spot. So I had kind of been thinking about, well, let's think about freshwater baskets. They're super unique to this region because it's really tightly wove cedar. It's almost knitted because it has to be woven so tightly to hold that fresh water. And these baskets would be the ones that would hold that water as Coast Salish people would go to Quiel Tub to get water. One thing I want to think about is talking to Ed Carrier, who's a Suquamish tribal member and, master basket creator, and talking about if there's designs that came from that side of the sound, or when we're paying attention to these basket designs, how could that be implemented into a bridge? Maybe from the trusses or, the side caging. How could we look at this and see the baskets that make us remember these stories of the land? Next slide, please. And then just, thinking about, this is a welcome figure down by Shulshul. This was done by my father. And thinking about this welcoming aspect, but thinking about the sounds and other relationships that are there. It provides a transition point. And while on the bridge, I was really thinking about the trains coming by, and they were super loud, but also once they left, you heard the lapping of the ocean, and that was pretty loud. And that's whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. And that is saltwater in the Shitsid. That's what, it's an onomatopoeia. So if you say whoosh, you can kind of hear the water lapping. And I really focused in on that and thought about how that could be a story within these baskets too. And we want to continue to, connect with the Suquamish tribe who rear the salmon at the Pipers Creek hatchery. But since we're kind of early in the decision, design process, we really want to make good use of their time and be intentional with them. But this is kind of the beginning stories of what Quiel Tub provides and has. Thank you.
Thank you, Owen. So now we're going to jump into the site analysis and then go through some of the alignments, and then we'll be finishing up. So in addition to the engagement pieces, we've been looking at the site in its detail. I think if any of you have ever been there, it's quite a unique spot within Seattle, the progression down that winding road into the forest, eventually arriving to the lawn that has the parking lots, and then the Salish Sea out beyond. In looking at the more immediate site, we have a variety of conditions. We have picnic table areas, the play area, which is also currently under design for a renovation of that, and Colin is also overseeing that piece of the project. We have the upper and lower parking areas as they wind around, and then the bridge finding its place here on the west side of the lower parking, going over the BNSF tracks onto an area, a small area of land that exists on the west side of the tracks that is outside of the high water line, though that is going to continually be increasing, unfortunately. And then the beach out beyond that. Here are some of the main circulation flows that we see around that. So within yellow, the car circulation is one way through this area. We also have the sidewalk that connects from the playground area all the way down to this lower meadow that is a historical orchard. Within the park, there's a trail system that goes through various areas of the forested zone. And the only connection at the beach is actually the bridge itself. So when thinking about whatever intervention we have on the site, we would need to think about it from multiple different perspectives. What is the placement of this bridge in terms of this view from the park itself? It both is a wayfinding device as well as an object that shows up on this amazing vista. Here you can see the existing bridge over there. We also want to think about what it's like to arrive to the existing bridge and how we can take and make it more accessible than it currently is. This ramp that exists there right now is, I believe, a 14% slope, so not quite doing it. And we just want to think about what it's like to come over to this point and be able to then get eventually to this location. And this is what we think is one of the key aspects of this. It's partially being able to exist over the tracks so that you can see those trains go by and get that rush of air as they come along and that sound that Owen was talking about. But it's also a place that people frequently hang out at the top of the stair and enjoy the view out to the Olympics. And we really want to amplify what that experience is like and make it so that it's not something where a single individual who has happened to get that corner at the top of the steps can occupy while also getting in the way of everyone trying to move up and down the stairs, but a place where you can hang out and really watch the activities on the beach as well as whatever's happening out in the Salish Sea. Some of the things that we're going to have to respond to are the topography. There is a fair amount of topography change that occurs through the area where the bridge is going to be located. So going from about plus 25, where we're going to need to be on the bridge, to then the water line over on the beach side. We also have a topography dropping down along this edge of the site. And I think here I should mention part of where we are right now is we have yet to get a full survey for this project. We do not yet have an arborist report of all the trees that are out there, and we do not have geotechnical borings in direct proximity to our site. We have taken and we went out with a LiDAR scanner and we scanned this entire area of the park. So we have highly detailed information as to elevationally what's happening, which has allowed us to do these studies with a fair amount of accuracy. But when it comes to things like the foundations, when it comes to things about trees that we might be removing, we know where the key elements are, but we don't have the official reports on those yet. And that's something that is in the works currently. So the features that we'll see in all of the alignment options at this point is we're looking at a sloped walkway as part of being able to get the necessary elevation gain so that we can achieve our vertical clearance over BNSF rail. We're looking at that as being a sloped walkway rather than a ramp, so we're trying to stay under 5% with all of that. We'll always have a 3'6" guardrail in those areas when we are outside the right of way. When we are within the right of way, we need to have that 10-foot tall throw barrier. The spans over the tracks need to be a minimum of 23'6" above the top of the rail, and that elevation is measured 1,000 feet in either direction of the rail, which is a fun little challenge to do for your site survey. We're looking at the inclusion of an accessible view platform, trying to make this generous enough that people can gather there, have views out to the Salish Sea while not being right at the top of the stairs as that comes through. And then we're looking at, you'll see two different configurations of a stair that takes you down to the beach itself. Our accessibility strategy that we've been developing with parks as well as with Joy Jacobson to get her review and take on this is we are trying to provide an accessible experience all the way out to that viewpoint. From that point down to the beach is a 30-foot vertical elevation drop. And so to handle that with a ramping system would require extensive ramping. To handle that with an elevator, you're putting that then into this difficult environment. Parks is looking at this from the point of view that there are facilities within the Seattle Park system that offer similar experience to this, that it's not trying to take and give accessibility all the way down to the beach. At the same time, we are not precluding within anything that we're designing the ability for something to come at a later point in time. It's not part of the current study, though. On the BNSF side, there's a number of different horizontal as well as one vertical clearance that we need to keep in mind. We have the center line of the tracks that everything is measured off of. Within this 34-foot zone, we need to maintain that 23'6". We're just rounding it to 24. The horizontal clearance out a little further, out in this area, we lost the line over here. That's where we need to keep our vertical structure outside of without having to put a bunch of barricades around it for BNSF. And then we have the overall right-of-way. Any work that we're doing within the right-of-way requires BNSF approval as well as BNSF flagger to be out there. That's both during our construction. That's if we want to go out there and do geotechnical drillings. That's if the parks later wants to go out and put some paint on the underside of the bridge. So it's an important drops down to the tracks here, it goes flat across, and then it drops again on that other side. So within that right-of-way is also where we're dealing with a lot of topography change and steep slopes. Here's a section through that area, looking at the foundations being outside of that 70-foot horizontal clearance. It's likely on the west side that the stair itself will still be within that right-of-way, because if it is not within that right-of-way, we are pushing it so far out into the beach that it's starting to enter into the high tide line. On the other side, we have an easier time with the soils as well as locations. We might be looking at trying to build on the slope that is still within the right-of-way, or we might take and increase the length of the span so that we are completely outside of the right-of-way. This is a project that we did up in Everett in the Grand Avenue neighborhood, looking at how the entire thing needs to essentially be prefabricated because we only have a limited window that BNSF will allow us to shut down the tracks. So that's going to be part of the strategy of what we think about. A truss makes prefabrication easy. A cable stay is more a segmental construction, so there could be some challenges there, but we haven't made any conclusions about that yet. So the vision that we have for any of the alignments that we're looking at is first and foremost being able to look at enhancing the safety of the bridge itself, as well as increasing the access that we have, being able to connect into current and future park infrastructure, something that fits in with the natural character of Carkeek Park, and that could take on a variety of forms, as well as minimizing the maintenance, especially over the areas of the track. So we started by looking at 3 different alignments, and these alignments started just with the idea of we know we have to be a certain height above the tracks, and that sets up a situation that we actually, in Scheme 1, need to start ramping at the north end of that parking lot in order to get ourselves enough height that when we cross, we have that clearance that we need. The situation that presented was the location of that approach ramp right along the edge of the parking. It's a fairly tight area that we have with a steep slope going on. We've got like a 4-foot wide sidewalk right next to the parking. So to get all that to fit in there, as well as the fact that by the time you get down here, you're about 10 feet off the ground, creates a bit of a tight situation along that edge. So we looked at some alternative options, an idea of just being able to go straight across, which it's efficient because it's straight. But it lands us in an area of the park that is somewhat not connected to anything else. And then we were looking at a situation here where we would go still over, and in this case, we're spanning both the tracks as well as spanning the parking lot. So there's likely more cost associated with more spans, but then we're putting this approach ramp in a location that it connects right back into the heart of the park where the playground and the bathrooms are all located, as well as connections to the accessible stalls within the parking. And it gives us an easier location for actually developing that approach ramp. When we presented this to Parks at ProView, there was a feeling that scheme number 2, just with its lack of connectivity into the rest of the park circulation, didn't really make sense. And that there was discussion around these 2 different schemes, scheme 1 and scheme 3. And for the rest of these slides, I'm just going to go between scheme 1 and scheme 3. But at this point, we've taken and removed scheme 2 from the mix. We have the model here. We have the additional backup slides with it if we want to dive into that in any detail. But we're looking at now scheme 1. The overall approach length from the time that we need to start elevating is 230 feet. It's about split in half of 115 of that being this approach ramp. And then we move to this location here where we're spanning over the tracks, coming to the other side with a viewpoint and then a stair down to the beach. We think that this could be done in either a truss or a cable stay. The downside with this alignment when it comes to a cable stay is we have no backspan available to us. So the mast that we would be making is doing all the work to just hold that one span out there, and that'll change when we look at the other scheme. So from there, we're also looking at what is the length of connectivity to the playground area. We're not expecting that we would be redoing all of that area, but instead just thinking about it, how does this tie you into the rest of the park experience? And then what are the other connections that it's tying you into? Being able to connect up with the sidewalk here that allows folks that are coming from the lower area to the bridge, as well as connecting up into the main area of the park. We're looking at a cambered situation where we need to just have that high clearance above the tracks in the center portion, which then sets up an ability where we could look at sloping back down after we crest over the tracks, which creates an interesting experience opportunity where now you are higher than that guardrail at the end, so you get more of an open vista out to the water. So here's a view of that overall scheme. This cyan colored line that you can see here is the current mean high water line. So view from the park with the guardrail system or the throw barrier system in the distance, looking at what happens along that edge of the parking lot. And here you can begin to see the tightness of that, the width of that sidewalk, the width of what we want for this approach ramp to make so that people can pass each other. And then simultaneously what's happening is the ground's actually dropping off underneath us here, which presents a challenging situation. The other option that we're looking at with scheme 3 is then spanning over the tracks as well as spanning over the parking lot itself, coming to an area here within this planted median where we could then take and have a structure that could be more built up on grade, connecting back into the central part of the park. This sets up a situation where we need to have clearance over the parking lot as well as over the tracks, but that all then fits within the overall geometry of what we need to achieve. We're looking at here the ability to connect back into that parking lot area. And in the end, this ends up creating a similar length of travel to what we were looking at with scheme 1. And so there's how general elevation changes are working in terms of your progression along that ramp. So the high point actually has more to do with the parking lot in this case, and then we're really just coming down to the area over here, which allows us to some extent to minimize the vertical offset that we have. In this case, we're looking at a different stair configuration. This is an option that could apply to either one, but it's a more compact footprint that we would end up with. View from the park, view along that parking lot edge, which has been opened up more, and then that would be the end of it. So these are still two options that we're moving forward with in our analysis. In particular, we want to be able to look at the cost comparisons between these. That's going to be a significant driver on this. And as we move forward, we're also going to be considering the materials that we choose. What is the effect on the embodied carbon? Looking at making sure we're not using any materials that would conflict with the salmon that are nearby Piper's Creek, such as galvanization. The zinc associated with that is a biocide. Looking at the maintenance of this, how do we take and ensure that the areas in particular over the tracks do not need to be constantly maintained by the parks system, as well as what the deck surfaces, which then has an impact on the weight, which has an impact on the foundations and the overall span. So with that, turn it over to you all for comments and questions, but thank you.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks, team. Excuse me. The next portion of the meeting, we have an opportunity for public comment. Then it'll be followed by commission questions and discussion. And again, I think the nature of the project, they'll be giving you comment on each of the options, primarily the two options, but maybe the third, the second one. I'm looking online and we have people who are attending. There is one call-in user. I'm not sure if any of the people online want to provide 2 minutes of public comment. If you have an opportunity, go ahead and raise your hand online. We'll come back and we'll check to see if that's occurred after commissioners start with questions. We also have 3 models today. Thank you, Matt, for opening the door to inspecting them. How do we want to start with questions? Do you want to start in the room or are commissioners virtually?
Yeah, I think we'll start with the commissioners joining us virtually first. So yeah, we'll do a round of questions and then we'll do a round of comments and recommendations. We have 9 commissioners here today and we have around 45 minutes or so. So I would just ask commissioners to be cognizant of that as we go around this. So let's just go in the same order that we did introductions. So we'll start with Molly first. So Molly, go ahead with any questions you have.
Great, thank you. One of the things, so great presentation. Thank you all for going in depth, including into the public outreach, community engagement, and the Indigenous engagement and potential for design. I wanted to quickly ask, you showed the stair going down to the beach. You showed the widths for the bridge itself, and in one of the drawings you shared the way that the stair may need to be within that BNSF right-of-way. Can you please share any implications that has for the width of that stair going down to the beach?
I would say at the moment, I don't think there are any implications that being within that right of way has on the width of the stair. I think we could make it whatever we like. I think part of it that we're looking at from the stair point of view is once with the bridge width, we're looking at more generous widths, given that people might be taking strollers out to that view platform or be within wheelchairs. So we want to have easy ability for people to pass each other. When it comes to the stair, we don't want to go too wide and create situations where people don't have the ability to be close to a handrail. So right now we've been looking at a 6-foot width for the width of the stair.
Okay, great, thank you. And then one other question, has there been any overlap between the work that you all are doing and any ongoing improvements to restrooms, playgrounds, or any of the other areas in the park?
Yeah, so that's something that all project teams are aware of the efforts that the other ones are doing. They have not gotten to a point yet where we have started coordinating with each other. Luckily, we have Colin on all of those projects, so he helps to be the conduit right now, but that is something that we're looking forward to being able to study further.
Great. Is that currently built into your schedule, or is that something you're still waiting to understand more about how it works into the future?
Yeah, I think it's been something that each of the projects have been getting up and running and establishing their directions. And now that that has happened, we'll be starting to meet with each other.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Molly. Pooja?
Hi there. For scheme 3, I was wondering how much clearance you need to provide over the parking lot and if you need to provide enough clearance for fire access up there.
I think we do have to provide access for fire. That is definitely the case. And we're looking at a 15-foot vertical clearance to the underside of structure currently. So that establishes our high point, and then from there, we can essentially go on a downward slope at less than 5% and still maintain our clearance over the BNSF tracks.
Okay, so in scheme 3, how much higher above finished grade does the bridge get at its highest point between the parking lot and the railway tracks?
Between the parking lot and the railway tracks.
Right there.
Yeah, so this would be our 15-foot separation, and that I would say is the highest, and then we're sloping down from that point.
So right where your cursor is there.
Yep.
This scheme is the bridge is higher than it would be in scheme 1.
Very much so.
And how much higher?
At that location there, I would say we're probably looking at, this is a guess right now, but that's probably about a 12-foot height. And I think within the other one, we're probably looking at more of a 9-foot differential. And I think the thing there that comes back to this kind of view is the proximity of what's happening there vertically right at the edge of that sidewalk versus, in this case, that difference being something that you're essentially able to walk under. One of the things that we have been considering is whether or not there's a stair that gets located at this location.
Scott, you have the
Got
slide that had the delta changes in grade.
Yeah. This way. This one.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's all I had.
Thanks, Pooja. Phoebe?
Thank you so much for the presentation. That's really exciting to see this. I've heard a lot about it. Follow-up questions. You mentioned on scheme 1 that the anticipated accessible route from the top of the ramp as it hits the sidewalk or hits grade is that already at a 5 or less than 5% slope because you're not anticipating doing improvements at the top?
In terms of this approach ramp that we have here?
Yeah, so at the top of the approach ramp over to the playground, you showed a diagram with the dotted
Yes.
line going up there. So
Yeah.
okay, so that all meets.
That is already an accessible grade.
Okay. Yeah, I think I was surprised to see that. I thought it was steeper. So okay, that's good to know. And then you're talking about again on scheme 1, the relationship between the ramp and the sidewalk. What are the dimensions there of the the width of the sidewalk and then the ramp as it slides in adjacent?
Yeah. So the ramp itself, we were looking at, or I should say the slope walkway that we're looking at there, we're in the order of 10 feet wide. We think this could be slightly narrower than what the span over the tracks would be, given that it's a less likely space that people are going to be trying to spend time compared to the bridge itself. The existing sidewalk that is there, we were expecting to leave that at the width that it currently is, which is around 5 feet. And with those two things of the 5 foot and then the 10 foot, we're tight at that point. And so that's part of what drove us to begin considering scheme 3.
Right. Okay. And that makes sense. So you could have flexibility then, and like you just said, of skinning up that sloped walkway.
Yeah.
Thanks for and then giving a little bit more breathing room to the passers-by if you went that direction.
Yep.
And then the slopes, I'm just understanding, just for understanding it, you're coming down on scheme 1, you're coming down at 5%, I mean, going up at 5%, and then you're crowning so that the bridge is a crown in scheme 1, and then
Yep.
it's a continuous down slope from the upper lot all the way continuous across the bridge to the viewpoint, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Great. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Phoebe. Jay?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I think my fellow commissioners asked a lot of the questions that I had on my mind, but to go back to the approach walkway width, we covered that for scheme 1. Is that the same for scheme 3? Would it match the width of the bridge for the crossing over the parking lot?
I think it could. With the approach ramps, we're looking at them as we want them to be comfortable for people that are circulating on them, but we're seeing them as a different experience than what happens on the span over the tracks in terms of there's likely less people trying to linger on those approach ramps. With that said, in scheme 3, we have a lot more width available to us to make that path what we would want it to be, while also recognizing every foot of width extra brings along with it extra cost for us. And so that's something that we're going to just have to be conscious of with it, any of these options.
Understood. And then for the ending on the beach side for both of these, do they end at different elevations? And both from a stairwell getting down to the beach perspective, but as well as considering any potential future ADA compatibility to get down to the beach. Could you speak a little bit more on both of these structures kind of land on the beach side?
Yeah, I would say it's a negligible difference. We might be talking about a difference of a couple feet, but it's not anything significant to the point that it would drastically change the overall stair configuration or any future ramping. They're both kind of hitting that point above the kind of that 34-foot wide window at the tracks. We're just hitting the corner of that with the slopes to try to minimize the overall elevation as much as possible.
Okay. And then the last question that I had, I think you briefly mentioned for Scheme 3, you were considering some type of access from the lower parking lot, if that was a stairwell or something similar. Would that also be considered in Scheme 1? I guess I'm trying to understand, where the existing stairwell is from the upper lot to the lower lot. Currently, it aligns pretty well with the bridge structure. And I want to understand kind of the thought behind the flow for anyone needing to kind of circulate around, or if there was also a consideration for some type of connection, stairs or similar from the lower lot.
Great question. It's something that I think we're going to be studying as part of the project. We think that the convenience of it would be nice to have, but then there's the cost side as well as questions about equal accessibility if we all of a sudden have a stair in that location. If we were to move forward with a stair, I think it does occur right here, essentially at that entrance to the existing bridge in both of the schemes, allowing for a tie into the trail system that goes off to the south. And I'll just mention here, one of the things I failed to mention before, we're taking the approach with all of these schemes that the alignment exists to the north of the existing bridge and the stair always exists to the west of the existing bridge, allowing us to maintain access to the beach, both for the public as well as for construction workers for the duration of the entire project. We will see as we move forward the extent to which we can do that. We have to renegotiate a right-of-way with BNSF anyway, so we have that opportunity, but we think the convenience of that for all parties is essential.
That's the least of your problem.
Yeah.
With BNSF.
Yeah.
That would be fantastic.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had.
Oh, thank you, Jay.
Thanks, Jay. We'll shift to the room now. Elizabeth?
Thank you for this presentation. It's terrific. I was wondering how some of the results of the outreach of the Hummingbird Project, the Hummingbird Community Collaboration and the community outreach and concept and initial design, how they're moving together. And how long that kind of information and stories and feelings will be able to impact this project.
Our plan is for Hummingbird and Headwater people to be involved through the length of design. It's something that we often are including them on with the projects that we have them teamed with us. I think at these early stages, a lot of this is helpful from the point of view of being able to get this project in front of the community while soliciting their feedback as to, like, so far we're just really hearing about what they love about the park and what they love about the experience of the bridge. And that can go in many different directions. We're hearing from people of they like the danger and the ricketiness and like the rustic quality of what's out there. And seriously, there's a bunch of people that want that somehow. And then there's other people that are like, please, whatever you do, do not make open grate stairs again. And part of those are the people that have dogs, like DB mentioned, but then we have to say to them, well, you're not even supposed to have your dogs on the beach anyway. So, but I think what's helpful for us when we had that community outreach meeting was hearing that this bridge is more than just about getting over the tracks. This is a place that people enjoy spending time. And that then means for this piece of infrastructure, we need to also think about this as being a place. And those are things that we're hearing from the public and their use of the existing facility. And I think as we continue to move forward with having community outreach meetings, it'll be coming back and being able to describe what we took from that to say we're trying to provide then accessibility all the way out to this view platform. We're trying to create a view platform where you can have that view out, a generous width that allows you to enjoy the trains going by. And then on the side with Owen, I think it's infusing us with a different context for how we think about the pieces of the bridge and what we can then do as part of that, and how, again, of treating this more than a piece of infrastructure, but it's a place, and how does it have the ability to have interpretive moments built into it that enriches your experience of the park.
When you say community, it sounds like it's community adjacent. Is the involvement of the? It sounds like the outreach is broader.
Yeah.
Or
Yep.
may broaden over time to have additional representation.
Yes, and so one of the great things about working with Hummingbird is while we're hosting these events out in the park, they also take and make sure, given their racial equity analysis, that they are reaching out into the community through other means to allow people that aren't necessarily just going to happen to be at the park at that time to let them know these things are going on, putting together the online surveys for folks that we might not have proximity access to with the park environment to solicit their opinions as well. And that's then going into that set of, or that slide that had all the various stats that we had generated.
And is it possible for those communities to actually encounter each other on site and in actual real life?
They're all receiving the same invitation. So then it's just a matter of being at that event in that space. But I think it's something that Hummingbird has also talked about, having outreach where we're going out into those communities rather than hosting the events just at the park itself.
That's helpful, thanks. Yeah, it sounded like, I think Deshawn at one point has talked about this being an iterative process.
Yeah.
I was very interested in knowing, iterating
Yeah.
for how long.
Yeah, it's on the schedule in terms of when we're working with them, it's not a one and done at the very beginning of this, but they're an essential partner for us within the daylighting of all the studies that we're doing to the rest of the public. So they're part of the design team.
And here's an impossible question, possibly. Just looking at the models and looking at some of the plan views, some of the graceful things that you're considering about how ramp meets ground, the viewpoint. Is there an opportunity for a little more curvature in plan view in this, and would that be useful?
I'm the last person you have to hold back from putting curves into things. But it's something that I think what's interesting about the bridge projects is the structure is basically all you have to work with, and it has to do all the work. So there's going to be some limitations from that point of view in terms of what we end up doing as part of this. The span type is going to have a large influence on that. With that said, there are ways of making trusses that are curved, approach ramps that could be curved, cable stays as well work with that. And I think a lot of it is often going to come down to how are we doing that without adding cost complexity to the overall project. But that's a challenge that we like taking on.
There's this other layer with BNSF is that their preference would be a 90-degree crossing of tracks.
Sure.
So there will be a negotiation of any degree beyond that.
Yeah.
You know, there does seem to be kind of an interest in having more of a gentle sweep. And I think that will be conversations we need to have in terms of
Yep.
far off and raising people to go.
I've worked with the railroad, I understand.
They're fun.
And it sounds as though weight is a consideration, so I'm wondering if transparency of that object, you've described the bridge
Right.
of an object, some
Yeah.
way to perforate that object is.
Yeah, and I think it again goes back to like a truss is going to have a different visual weight than the cable stay is going to have. It's going to change the integration of what the throw barrier is like as part of that. Given the experience that everyone wants to have of like being right there on the tracks, that influences how we think about what that throw barrier is. Is it more of a solid element with perforations that allows you to have those views, or is it something that becomes as minimal as possible with like cable mesh that allows for that transparency to make it seem like it's not really there from a distance? But I think those are all things that we're really looking forward to jumping into. And we have some initial reactions or thoughts that will guide us, but no solution.
Thanks.
Two quick comments. Yeah, I was going to ask about the degree of crossing, and it looks like scheme 3 is like 125-degree crossing proposal,
yeah,
as opposed to scheme 1. And so to me, that was an interesting question. Is, you know, for example, scheme 1, could you change it to like 125, 130 degree crossing and then push
Yep.
the entry ramp closer to the amphitheater, splay it out.
Yeah.
Was that not
I would
possible?
say the alignments that we have are loose enough that
Yeah.
those are still things that we'll be
Okay.
considering. In addition to the BNSF suggestion that it should be at 90 degrees, we've already been having conversations with our consultant Hanson, who's doing the BNSF coordination, about there is room to be able to say like, well, we need it to be that because these are the reasons, rather than just because. And then one other thing that it does, it's slight, but it does have an impact on things, is as we start to rotate that bridge, it increases the span length.
Mhm.
So it's just something that we're going to have to be mindful
And
of.
then my only other question quickly is, it appears that, is it true that scheme 3 could be either a box truss or cable free, with mast, but scheme 1 really lends itself only to box truss because it's in the backspan?
We can do both
You
on
could
either
do
one.
both, although
The efficiency of
it's
the
more
cable,
heroic.
yeah, exactly. So
Okay.
the balance on that mast, when it's only being pulled on one side, that
Yeah.
mast has to get even beefier. Whereas in scheme 3, it's essentially centered, and it's not like we're getting the second span for free, but
Yeah.
you're not paying double
I was just
necessarily for
wondering
that.
if it- The box truss, it is possible to carry those equal loads on the beachside pier.
Yeah, and well,
It's challenging.
it's possible. It becomes more challenging from a construction access. And then there's another little twist within there, which is we are studying the potential of a cantilevered truss,
Got it.
which means that the truss is essentially behaving like the cable stay, but it gets much heavier on the parking lot side, and then it gets lighter as it goes across.
Okay, that's all my questions. Go ahead.
So my questions are about ADA and climate change. So on ADA, you've got me convinced now that this is going to be an unrivaled, unparalleled opportunity to stand there
Mhm.
and look at. I don't see other places in the city necessarily that would be that great.
Yep.
So then, what kind of outreach has happened to the broader ADA disability community in the area?
Yeah.
Have you done any outreach?
I wouldn't say specifically to the community, like an ADA community with it. We have had, and Parks in particular, with themselves, had conversations with Joy Jacobson about what should be expected on this project from an accessibility point of view.
Exactly. I think there's heavy lifting here beyond what Joy can do for free within her departmental responsibilities.
Yeah.
So I think you might look for ADA, but we can talk about that later. Has Joy done analysis? All struggling to try to figure out how to balance 1 and 3.
Yeah.
And what that extra structure and having to get on it in the middle of the parking lot versus the edge of the parking lot does for you. So have you got any kind of path of travel that would explain why 3 might actually be a better path of travel?
In relationship to other programming that we're not looking at, or just?
No, just within itself,
Okay.
you know? I mean, a 5% slope is the minimum, right? There are all kinds of other things that actually enhance
Yeah.
your ability to travel.
Yeah.
Places where you need to stop and rest, the flats in between,
Yep.
all of that. Have you had a chance to analyze 1 versus 3 with that criteria?
No, Joy has seen these, and her comment at the time was an acknowledgement of accessibility basically being limited to arriving at that view platform. At that time, we did not get into conversations yet around the greater implications of like rest areas like you're talking about. I think each of them with the transitions that occur are naturally going to like force a landing location just because we can't slope through those turns. And then I think it becomes a difference of on the park side of things, we have an opportunity for a much more gracious landing. We've talked about being able to table the parking lot at that point so that we can give priority to the access across the parking area. In this scheme 1, by necessity, we just have a more compact footprint. So we're not going to be able to put as much emphasis on that
When you're hitting
rival
existing
point.
conditions really quickly. and
Yeah.
then- Okay, on the climate change side of things, this idea of cantilevering and having as little load as possible, are you looking at multiple stair locations, or do you need to get a consultant who can help you look at 50 years from now where those stairs are gonna land or where those stairs may need to be? The levels of Puget Sound Drive?
Yeah, so we actually took our LiDAR scan, allowed us to know all the topography of the site. We were able to take through GIS, they have already a recorded mean high water line from that. And then we were just using climate projections of what it could rise, and we were offsetting that plane and intersecting it. The thing that works to our advantage with the stair that stays within the right of way and proceeds in a straight line, or not straight, but towards this direction in the south, is that we are far away from the mean high water line in that case. The stair that we were looking at, which would spiral around a support here, is in really close proximity to it. So there's this trade-off of we have a much smaller footprint. We're not disturbing this vegetated area that already exists on the beach, but we're putting that in direct proximity to it. We've talked about potentially a plinth at that point, that like rather than arriving at the beach elevation, we have to think about like what you arrive onto. We're not just dumping people directly into sand immediately. So there could be an opportunity there, and then configuring a path that could take you a little bit more to the south. But I don't think that we're going to find in either case that the stair is problematic from the high tide line increasing. There's actually a fair amount of slope that still happens in this last area. So you're not seeing that drastically invade that territory.
In terms of the program that Burlington Northern keeps talking about, of having to do better protection of the tracks so that they don't wash out multiple times each winter, have you had any conversations about how what you're doing may interact with their thinking?
We have not yet had any conversations with BNSF.
Okay, because in your schedule, you talked about some initial, your schedule had one touch point with
That's what comes right after this.
Oh, it showed it before this.
Oh, yeah, so that's actually Hanson reaching out to them to let them know this project exists and it's coming. So that was the initial outreach to them.
Okay.
We have not shared any of the design information that we've looked at so far. From what we understood during the initial feasibility study, there are no plans to actually expand the width of the tracks in this area. So that's not something that we're having to
I
account
think it's just the protection
Yeah.
is gonna have to change.
Yeah.
And I just wonder when they're gonna be able to talk about it. I'm done, Kevin, thanks.
Okay, so Ben stepped out of the room, so I'll go. So just a couple of questions. Excellent questions so far. Going back to alternative 2 for a second.
Yeah.
I think, what I'm sort of thinking about, and I think other commissioners are as well, is sort of the desire line for where you want to start the ramp. And I'm someone, I live in the Northwest Seattle. When I access this place, I walk in via the trails.
Yeah.
And that alternative 2 ramp is sort of closer to where the trails kind of come in from that direction. So I was just wondering if that was a consideration in developing that alternative, and is that a consideration in now we're potentially losing that? Is that a concern on anybody's part, as opposed to trying to access from the parking lot area?
Yeah, the challenge that we were seeing with this was we think like this as a location within the park could be okay as a spot, given it's actually relating to a lot of the parking that continues to the east. The challenge is there's no other infrastructure in this area. Right. And so in comparison to Scheme 3, now all of a sudden it's like, okay, we've got to go across here onto the lawn.
Right.
And now we need a sidewalk to wrap the entire lawn. And it just felt like it eliminated itself because of all of that extra. It's still a concern we have with Scheme 3 of the additional length that's there, but we think it affords some other opportunities.
And then the other question I have, so can you go back to the pros cons slide of the 2 remaining alternatives? So how are you going to, do you have specific criteria you're going to use to evaluate these? I'm thinking about your vision statement. You've got 4. Are you going to use those as ways of sort of evaluating these?
I would say with both of them, we can probably hit those vision pieces that we have for the project. I think a big driver of this is going to come down to cost. And that cost is going to be the superstructure itself and the foundations. Those are the 2 elements that are going to make up the vast majority of the cost that we're looking at here. And what we're trying to understand as we get further into that is, what does it mean to build this approach ramp, which is likely a set of small spans itself, on a slope right next to the right of way for the railroad, which seems like it's going to bring some cost associated with that, versus this location here where we have more space available to us. We have the ability to construct that in closer proximity to grade, even potentially build it as a slab on grade approach. And so that's going to be a lot of, I think, what is going to decide between one and the other. And if we find that they're close, it'll maybe be an easy one to just choose which is the better experience. If they're vastly different, then I feel like it's going to create a situation where we may have to look for additional funding, which could create a delay within this. But that's something that we'll be working with Parks to figure out.
Okay. I may have some thoughts on that, but
Yeah.
I'll defer that.
Yeah.
Ben, other questions?
Yeah, so you say on scheme 3, you say it's connected to center park activity. Do you have a diagram that kind of speaks to that? And I guess I'm just trying to understand like what it's this.
So I think what we were meaning by that was feeling like it was a more direct connection to the lawn area, the picnic areas. It's in a highly visible spot versus the alternative being what's currently there, which could be suitable, which is walking along the edge of the parking lot the entire way to get down to that same location. So it's trying to put the arrival point for the bridge in a spot that is closer to the activity rather than you're kind of walking just along a sidewalk before you recognize here is where the takeoff point is located.
So if you park in that lower level and you want to go in this scheme, you would walk kind of up the hill and around the corner to that spot.
Yeah. My experience of the park has been that parking is at such a premium. There's a high likelihood you're walking from a distance anywhere you are within it. And then it's just thinking about more people are out of their cars, they're hanging out, enjoying the park. How do they progress from the lawn playground area to the beach and back, potentially multiple times a day?
Is there, do you have the same diagram for the other option?
There's.
So a question might be is there a connection? And I guess to me the bridge, the option 3, I guess the big piece over it seems like so much the span over it now. It just seems so sort of intrusive out there. And I know you guys do beautiful bridges, so I know that it'll be a beautiful bridge. I have no doubt about that.
Yep.
It's just a thing.
Yep.
It's like looming out
Yeah.
there. I was wondering if there's a way of connecting the park at grade to scheme 1, so that you have a better connection from the central park area that you were just referring to. Instead of building a big structure, deal with
north to this location, it's sloping down fairly considerably. We're fighting that, and we that might not even be getting us to the height that we need to be over the tracks at this point here.
And then what is the likelihood that you would put a stair in on this option, like where the 8 feet
Right.
grade is?
I don't think we've ruled it out or found that it's a definite at this point. I think it's further study in terms of what we can support on the project, as well as the question of equal accessibility. If all of a sudden we're creating this shortcut, it could be seen as not then being equally accessible.
I mean, so we're not commenting, right? We're just asking.
We're going to be commenting.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
So yeah, so let's move to the comments. So first of all, it's 5 of. I think we can stay till about quarter after. Does that
Yep,
work?
that
for the
works.
Presenters, that's great. Okay, so
The only plug I'll put in.
Yes.
Karen Breitmeyer gets asked this question. She's always pushed into service on these issues.
We work with Karen often.
I might be money well spent.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point.
anyway, sorry. Yeah, Karen is always asked, but I think it's an important thing. Thank you.
Sure. So I think what we're going to weigh in on as a commission is the direction of the concept development work to date, and then comments on the alternatives development and process moving forward. So things to consider would be, how do the alternatives compare to the vision articulated, user experience, civic experience, sustainability and access, and then outreach strategy and equity. I think those are all things that have come up. So let's just go in the same order. So Molly, if we could start with you on any comments, recommendations.
Great, thank you so much. So again, thank you for the clarity on Hummingbird and Headwaters work. I really appreciated that the opportunities to drive design outputs was brought up early, and that this will be continuous work on both sides. So we look forward to updates in that regard. I also appreciated the improvements to ADA access in terms of widths and the potential for future ADA improvements to the beach outside of this project, if ever plausible. So maintaining the opportunity to do that if it's ever available is great. And I agree with the idea of bringing someone like Karen Breitmeyer on board to really help whichever option selected be best for all of our users who are now gaining additional access to this space. I appreciate the use of models for grade understanding. I know I'm not in the room, but I know that that's really useful for community engagement. So I'm interested to hear how that helps your community engagement process and what you learn from conversations around models with those who you're engaging. You likely have these somewhere, but I think I heard a lot of commissioners ask this same question. I think clearer context diagrams with destinations and desire lines would be really valuable for us for future briefings and for public engagement. So where it's really clear where the playgrounds are, where the restrooms are, where the trails are, so that you can really get feedback on where people are coming from in order to access this, to help you with exactly where that should land, to drive both the selection between the two options, but also the question that that came up that Matt brought up about if there is any possibility to angle over the tracks and to really adapt to where the base of that landing occurs, if that can be really driven by desire lines and destinations. And I think a big portion of that point for me is that I understand that many people are arriving by vehicle, that I saw 64%. But I also saw that 30% are arriving by biking, walking, rolling. So that's a substantial portion of your users already. But I also want us to keep in mind that those other surrounding destinations, even for those who are arriving by vehicle, they may be going to the playground first, they may be going to the trails first, and then to the beach. So I would ask that in community engagement, you're thinking about, you know, where are the many places that people are coming from, and having clarity for people responding to you about where they are within the park, as well as for us, just when we're thinking about this, if we can not center the parking, but rather the many ways that people are arriving to the site, would be really valuable. I would encourage you to continue exploring the angle potential with BNSF. I'm glad to hear that those conversations will be happening. And again, would ask that that be driven by desire lines and destinations. And then just one note on if Scheme 3 were selected, it'll be interesting to see, one, if a stair addition is valuable, and again, to whom, to what desire lines, coming from what destinations might that be valuable. And then also on if Scheme 3 were selected, the additional aesthetic focus on the underside of the bridge. As others said, I know that that's something that you would do, but just noting that that's something we would want to see if that one were developed. That's it for me. I'll pass it on.
Okay, Pooja?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I know you mentioned that there's challenges with constructability, and very much appreciate that. The presentation you gave was really thoughtful and well well explained. But yeah, that constructability component is going to be a challenge. So I wish you luck with that.
We're looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Phoebe?
Goes to me. Yep, I'm here. Thank you. I think I just want to echo what Molly said about the diagramming of the larger context. I think it was interesting because I think from my perspective as a user, not frequent, but I do go to Carkeek. I think there's a lot of logic behind Scheme 3, but I heard my fellow commissioners asking a lot of questions about that. And so it really does drive home that point that understanding the greater context is really critical. And that also goes back to that coordination with the new playground project and understanding those are different scopes, but at least that holistic appreciation and thoughtfulness behind the orchestration of the park, right? Because this is a huge improvement and amenity to the park that I think will really open up different doors. And so behind that, I think that there is a lot of potential that I see with Scheme 3, although it has a bigger impact and, throughout in terms of its aesthetics, I think it does really open up this invitation. Which I do think goes to that sense of placemaking. So going back to, talking about the community engagement and talking about how that kind of input is affecting the desired outcomes. I was thinking about this bridge and this entry sequence as a place and how we're fostering that. So I do think there's a lot of merit in making that like a strong visual expression in the park. So I'm really excited to see how that continues. I do think in general, the potential to slim up those approach walkways is important. And then obviously you'll continue, like right now, it's just a diagram of how you're extending that 10-foot segment. But I think that will kind of afford also kind of a lighter imprint on the land. And then especially in Scheme 1, that adjacency between the existing sidewalk and the sloped walkway. And then just lastly, to Molly's point about parking, I again see very much in Scheme 1, it feels like a parking oriented solution, and it almost feels to me status quo for what is existing. I think that you are expressing that as well. So I think expanding the boundaries from that it's not accessing just along adjacent the parking lot to get to the entry point, but really thinking about how this is an expression and fostering connectivity in the whole park context is important. Thank you.
Hey, Jay.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and thanks for the presentation. I'll agree that the images and models shown today were really useful in getting good context of these different alternatives and understanding really clearly understanding the pros and cons of each of these. I will similarly mirror what has been spoken on for understanding the differences of access to this park. I personally live quite close to this park. I come to this park at least every other week and I walk there. So it is a very different experience. I remember the first time I drove here and it was a very different experience parking because it showed me a completely different side of the park that I had not seen from accessing it via trail. So I would iterate again, as others have said, that you're considering not just kind of what the majority experiences, but even these other very significant portions of the population. The access to this park is very different for people who drive to the park versus walk or bike to the park, and just taking that into consideration. I also want to mention that I really appreciated the consideration that was spoken on for not just taking into account the visual aspect of this bridge, but also thinking about the sights and sounds and smells of this area, and that a park kind of allows for all of those senses and stimulations, and really taking that into account as part of design. I just appreciated hearing that. I would say I have some reservations about the idea of kind of bottlenecking both the approach walkway and the stairwell being narrower than the bridge width, as I understand that more people will likely kind of dwell on that bridge structure. However, I urge you to consider you know, especially on a stairwell, people go at very different speeds. I know on the current stairwell, people do still, you know, linger there. So depending on what design is chosen there, I just urge you to think about not making that too narrow, and creating that bottleneck experience. Similarly for alternative one, I know there's a couple of benches along that lower lot today where a lot of people dwell and spend some time to kind of look out on the water and not go down to the beach if accessibility is a little bit more challenging for them. So I would think about both, you know, for alternative one, how that approach walkway may block the view, or, you know, wanting to provide enough width for those people who don't necessarily cross the railway, and just kind of taking those paths of the full experience across the bridge into consideration. And then I think the one other thing that I'll say is I do like the concept of the cable stay bridge. I you know, taking into consideration, you know, this beach is going to be worn away a little bit, and I think there's some good opportunities for future proofing as well as some really positive aesthetics there. But I fully understand that that's something still under consideration. I just wanted to mention that as well. And that's what I had. Thank you.
Okay, Elizabeth?
Thanks. Molly mentioned people coming from other places, and I'm thinking about some of what Headwaters and Hummingbird talked about regarding the importance of Kitsap County, which is right across the Kitsap Peninsula, which is right across the water, and also seeing those images of baskets which are strong enough and can carry water. So for me, I think just I appreciate that you're open to keeping public involvement going through a lot of the aspects of this project. And so I'm hoping that those kinds of visions that are coming possibly from Kitsap County, you know, when I see weaving, I think structure.
Yeah.
And I think of all kinds of structures. So I do hope that openness and some conversations across those communities, you know, between the community that is adjacent to this space and is accustomed to, very familiar with this space, and others for whom this is part of really important history.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that being on your schedule. The other thought I had was might be helpful to just look to Europe or other, well, across the seas somewhere, different places, to see how a structure can accommodate sea level rise. It looks like you've already started doing that.
Yeah, well, we go to the conferences for footbridges and they're always in Europe, so.
Okay. Well, but actually there's a community that's relocating just on, you know, outside Nia Bay as well right now. So I think, you know, when I'm in Venice, I have thought about climate change, because so much of that is accommodating sea level rise, and there may be some solutions to Jill's question about the stairway that, you know, maybe it's a fire escape, maybe it lowers down and then you kind of dismantle it going up as sea level comes up. And that's all I'm going to brainstorm on. So thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Zach. This is a great presentation. I love the physical models. That's super helpful. Appreciate the work from the team, from Hummingbird and from Headwaters people, and helping to steer this. Couple thoughts about alignment and about the overall project. It seems to me that in general, simplicity might should be a priority in assessing these alternatives. For a couple of reasons. I mean, I think first of all, the site is so powerful, as we all know, and so amazing that really, how can this addition to the site or replacement bridge just to the site, you know, enhance the power of the natural site and not add to it unnecessarily.
Yeah.
And I'll get to the thoughts about that in a second. But in terms of the alignments, I also think that that's just come up with some of the conversations that it seems like there's, in the current thinking about the project, there's a limit that the parking lot and the configuration and size and location of the parking is not part of the project. And I think maybe it should be. Because it's, you know, might actually be more effective, more cost effective. You know, parking is paving and painting and grading and curbs, modifying or adjusting that could be, I don't know, but I suspect, could be more cost effective than some of the costs for approach ramps and bridge, which are structured and have guardrails and have footings and have foundations. And so, for example, with Scheme 1, it's so hemmed in against the existing parking that maybe it doesn't work because you're trying to put the ramp next to the walkway next to the curb. Well, what if you just readjusted parking and gave yourself some more space? And I don't know that that would work, but I think maybe that should be considered if Scheme 1's viable. Because what if you push the parking back? What if you angle the stalls and narrow the drive aisle or cut it into the island? I don't know. But that seems to me that work could be less costly than the cost for your approach. I think you know that. Okay, so then the other thing is I do think Scheme 2 still has merit because of its simplicity. And it doesn't make sense with the current parking, but obviously you have to reconfigure the parking where it lands. But I think the simplicity of Scheme 2, even if Scheme 2 is decided to not be viable, there's a simplicity to Scheme 2 in the lack of dog leg, less structure. It seems like it might be taking advantage of distant topography in a more beneficial way rather than chasing topography. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I think there's something about, and then when we get to structure, looking ahead, and I can't help but think of this. I really think the box truss is probably the right approach because one, you have to have the throw barrier anyway. So you get a 2-for-1. That's simplicity. You maybe an asymmetrical box truss that can cantilever. I actually think cable stays, it's beautiful, it's gorgeous, but I'm imagining an 80-foot tall mast. With a split, and that could be gestural and beautiful, but is this a spot for that? I mean, thinking of Calatrava's Sundial Bridge in Redding, California. It's a wonderful piece of sculpture crossing the Sacramento River. I just don't know that that's what we need here. Maybe that's appropriate in an urban environment and less appropriate here. So maybe here the elegant, simple solution might be the most civic. That's all I can say. Thank you very much. This is really exciting. Amazing.
Okay. I've got 3 things. First, I hear people asking for more overall site context. I would encourage you to turn that into and grow that to an overall vision and concept for all of these projects in the park. Because Parks' approach of here's the bridge and here's the play area and here's this. I think the saltwater to freshwater connection that was laid out gives you a vision in which all of these things could live within it and would allow you to start at the Piper Creek's entry and really rethink, if you're making these kinds of investments, what is the meaning of all of this amazing place where the sound and these creeks come together, and there's this salmon spawn and perhaps. So big picture, I think it's really time to make a big picture story of all of this stuff. Second, when you say the cost is a big factor, I would love to have you say resilience is a big factor as well. And cost and resilience should be balanced against each other. Short-term cost now versus long-term, resilience. And I think people have thrown you a lot of ideas that fit in that bucket as well. And then lastly, in terms of the outreach for the local community, the intentional outreach for BIPOC constituents, the intentional outreach to the indigenous people is all fantastic. You need a parallel outreach of that to the disabled ADA community. Because I think with the access van program and other things, this should be a citywide, countywide, region-wide, whatever asset, and you need to be evaluating and hearing those voices as well. And Karen's great, but she's not the answer to that. Embedding it in your outreach at a bunch of levels is going to give you the 360-degree look at that you need. And I think now I'm going to add a fourth one because I think what he just said about the parking lot is so true. I can see a day when that parking lot is all ADA parking and able-bodied people walk on a trail. I think you need to really think, this is a 50-year, 100-year investment. what all of these demographic trends are gonna lead to.
Yeah.
And how the blacktop is the least important material and issue and plane that you're dealing with. So we think that too. Okay, thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Jill. Ben?
I guess I'm looking at the Google Maps. I dropped my person down in the parking lot there. There's something really compelling, really elegant about the thinness and the lightness of the existing structure and bridge and just how it sort of flings out there. And I know that this will be more robust for all the right reasons, but as I'm looking at that, it feels like there's a great opportunity, as we mentioned earlier, of making this more of this sort of entry point to this version, more of a vista view kind of anchor spot for the site, so that maybe you don't want to go down to the bridge, but that it's like the main, it looks like it's an incredible view that would almost probably rival the view that you have out at the end here. And then, you know, the distance, like the I guess I'm very unconvinced of that this is a better connection to this, because if I get on this, if I'm down here, I gotta walk up and around and then kind of double back on myself. But also, if I get to some point of the bridge and want to, I guess it just seems like such a long distance. I gotta go all the way back and around, and it's just a long, super long route. Versus this is a much more direct route. And it just feels like a lot of structure to put out on this really beautiful natural site with this overhead. I know bridges, you have to connect, so I guess I don't see this being, I don't see many advantages to this one. And I think it's shown, you know, there's only a couple of cons and it's mainly a couple of pros, and it's primarily about the connection. So this seems like a stronger option or opportunity to me. I kind of agree with some of what Matt was saying earlier. It's like I love the simplicity of that straight line from the landscape. I'm kind of drawn to that, but I think this makes a lot more sense. And I guess you might have mentioned already, maybe I missed it, but this has the long stair that's similar to the existing stair, correct? And then this one has the one that wraps around. Are those interchangeable?
Yes, they're absolutely interchangeable.
Yeah, and then I mean, I'm drawing the lines and long kind of things, but this one feels like that version on that one is sort of the normal impact of the site, which is so. And I agree with everything there. Beautiful models, great presentation. Really looking forward to this. I'm sorry for hogging these.
That's okay. So just two quick comments, and then we'll go to the final recommendation. So I agree. I'll just mirror what Ben said. Scheme 1, I like more. My concern is the squeezing of the ramp with the sidewalk. So I'm all for Matt's idea of just blow up the parking lot. Let's figure out what makes the most sense for the site. You know, that's really think big. I think that will be part of our recommendation. And then the other comment is I was a little concerned about the sort of the cost being the driver. I mean, I've worked on a lot of alternatives analyses for transportation projects and transit projects. I think it's really important for public and decision makers to be really clear about here's what drove our decision.
Yeah.
So you've got pros, cons here, which is good, but that still doesn't tell me, well, how did you make the final decision? So I think I think it's more than just cost. I think it's design. I think it's context. I think it's at desire line. I think it's structure. There's a whole bunch of things, it seems to me, that are different about these alternatives. I think being really clear about those and how did you make what will ultimately be the preferred alternative, and being really clear about that with decision makers and the public, I think is really important. So with that, Jill, do you have any other comments before we get to the final recommendation?
The question we have next is, have we confused you about anything? Not everything.
No. I think the questions and comments you're making are the ones that we are finding ourselves grappling with as we're looking at all of this.
Because if there's anything you need for us to clarify, you can do that while Kevin is finalizing his.
No, I think it was all fairly clear.
Okay. Same with the. Okay. Got it, Kevin?
Yeah, I think so. So our action today would be that whether we're ready to approve the direction of concept development for Carkeek Park replacement project. And I'm going to try to articulate the following recommendations as came out in the discussion. One, public outreach, a whole bunch of aspects there. One, continue public outreach throughout the course of the project. Be clear about how public outreach is informing the plan development and concept plan development all the way to the final preferred alternative. Continue with I think the inclusive outreach you've done. The commission really appreciates that, so continue that with all of the communities you have reached out to, and certainly the accessibility disability community is a really important one. In terms of your methods for community outreach, continue to use models and graphics because that's really helpful. Also, be as clear as possible with the overall context of what you're doing as it relates to the whole overall park. That's really important for the public to sort of understand that. And totally agree with the comment about really think about what's happening in the park as a sort of one vision for ultimately what you want to accomplish and how all these different pieces connect with each other. So that would be really important to sort of continue that. Also, make sure that as you're thinking about concept development, how the final alternative will relate to climate, the changes in climate that will be happening on the beach and the water line over time. Really continue to think about all the different ways that people access this site, not just people arriving at the parking lot, but people walking, people biking, all the different ways people get to this site, because I agree with, like Jay, I walk here when I get there. I don't drive to the parking lot. So just think about that overall. And then let's see. I think there's I heard some early support for Scheme 1, but I also heard some support for keeping Scheme 2 at least in the mix for now, just thinking about the simplicity of design. So thinking about simplicity of design and what needs to happen would be, I think, really important. Let's see. I think what I heard was the commission supports keeping both a truss option and a cable stay option on the table, and then being really clear about when an alternative gets dropped and how we do that. And then, am I missing? I think those were the big things I heard. The big themes.
Did we mention considering parking lot?
Well, yes, and then consider. I think that should be part of our recommendation. Just consider. I think that's part of considering the overall needs of the park and where the park is going. And I think that would include. I agree that the parking lot, the existing design of the parking lot, shouldn't be a constraint, particularly with Scheme 1. But I think that's true of both Schemes 1 and 3. So I think that's an important part of our recommendation.
I think there was an aesthetic one too, maybe that could be a separate item to kind of be less.
I was suggesting
Less
simplicity as a driver in assessing options.
Yeah.
Simplicity because of the power of the natural site.
Anything else that anyone would want to add to our recommendation?
Kevin, I think the one other thing I'd mention is it sounds like myself and a few other commissioners did mention some considerations for both cost and access for both the stairwell and the approach walkway widths.
Yes, agreed. So we'll add that as well.
Thank you.
And I think in terms of next step, because they're still weighing options, when you come back to us with a preferred option and taking the work that the commission provided you today and seeing how that's programmed, I think we'll do something more formal then.
Yeah.
But I think you certainly have a broad amount of input from us today, and hopefully that will play into your choice.
Absolutely.
We're going to vote for the design direction today.
Well, I don't know that they have a specific option.
Okay, we worded it.
I think we were gonna vote on
Okay.
approving the direction of the concept development plan with the recommendations we just articulated. The last one I would add, I'm going back to public outreach, is just be really clear with the public about how their input is then affecting the decision and the evolution of the design process. I always find that to be super helpful.
And then we're totally comfortable with the mix and match.
Yes. So again, the action is to approve the direction of the concept development for the Karki Park Bridge Replacement Project moving forward with the recommendations we just articulated. And we'll go around and ask for vote. We'll start with Molly.
Approved with recommendations.
Pooja?
Also approved.
BB?
Yeah, same, approved.
Okay.
Yep, approved.
Elizabeth?
Approved.
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 Approved. Approved. Thank you so much. For
Of course,
that.
yeah,
thank you all.
Thank you.
We're back at,
One.
I'm gonna grab lunch.
So my first comment yesterday, when we were talking about this, no, I had a coffee and I had to carry it from downstairs. She walked down just fine, right? But I want the kids to, you look at it and you just see nothing and you, it's an optical illusion when you look up the stairs because.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, commissioners. We'll